So I think it's new. It's 11 o'clock. I'm going to get going and officially want to say hello and welcome to everyone joining us for our second effective virtual conversations call. It is August the 7th, and today's topic is all about moving the needle on engagement. So whether you're joining me live or virtually, just want to say hello. It's great to have people on the call, and really looking forward to this very important topic. So it's been a week since Effective Virtual Conversations was launched as a new release last week on Amazon. Very exciting week. I've had emails literally from across the globe, which is just representative, I think, of how virtual conversations are spanning the globe through all time zones, all times of night and day. And with that in mind, I'm guessing many of you are going to be listening to these calls. They can all be found at effectivevirtualconversations.com, and they're part of an ongoing series of community calls. Given that it's summer in North America or in the Western Hemisphere right now, it's certainly a lot of us on holidays. It's an official holiday in Canada, and working remote today as I am throughout this month out of Muskoka. So pleasure to be here. Really want to welcome you back. Our last call last week, if you haven't listened to it, was a review of the different chapters of Effective Virtual Conversations. Really, many of you have already written and you've noted that you've really enjoyed just the very practical tips. So today is no different. Today's focus, of course, is all on engagement. And just a reminder that our next call, August 15th, and that will be on different platforms. We'll be meeting from 11 to 11:30, same time next week. And I'll be walking through some of the more frequent or the more utilized platforms. By any means, it is not the be-all and end-all, because one of the things that we really are seeing in today's digital and trends, really the whole space of technology, is just the ongoing rapid change. So it's a very exciting time. I hope that you'll get inspired to pick up your own copy. Of course, the book right now is available on Amazon and print and Kindle. Later this week, I should have my own copies available here. So if anyone's wanting a autographed copy, do stay tuned to Effective Virtual Conversations. So with that, I want to jump right into this very important topic of engagement. Of course, our call is only 30 minutes today. As we get going, I'd like you to think about, what does it mean to move the needle on engagement? How important is engagement for you, and what does that look like and sound like? One of the things that I really found interesting in not just writing this book, but in certainly the last 3 decades of my work, is that engagement means so many different things for so many different people. I think back to what it means today in the context of a lot of my work here on Zoom and webinars, really helping people connect early on with their what's in it for me. That's very different, though, than a team leader who may be bringing together people from across the world, where we're clear on our what's in it for me, but the big challenge with engagement might actually be navigating dual platforms. So we're going to touch on a couple of these real-time issues that are quite at the mindset or at the forefront for different virtual professionals today. And I'd like you to think about, what is your context right now? What's most important as you think about engagement? Is it getting people out of that death by conference call mindset, which is so really rapid and prevalent in many institutions today? Or is it literally, how do we help people get onto platforms that we're on? So I think there are 4 main areas for opportunity, starting with number 1, which is the start. And if you have a copy of the book already, today I'm going into key areas. So page 225 of the book, excuse me, is going to give you some more content where we actually zoom into this topic. And what I'm suggesting, as I've already mentioned, is to really connect people with their with them, or their what's in it for me. Really, as in any presentation, but especially virtually, we just have a few minutes, a few seconds literally, to grab people's attention. Here in the virtual domain, of course, we are competing against other devices, emails, websites. So not everyone is really keen on attending and participating in this. So I'd like you to think about, what are you planning for your start of your meeting? Whether it's a 1-hour meeting, virtual meeting, or whether it's a 1-day virtual session with your team. What is it that will get you to hook the audience or grab their attention? This is where I think we can go back to our standard presentation skills. We can maybe ask a question. We may show a video. We may hear from everyone in attendance. I recently had a call with a team that I met with virtually, and really the first 10 minutes of our call was getting them to input on what they saw as a connection point. We're talking about the topic of feedback. And within this team, I suspected, as with any team, there were a variety of perspectives around feedback. I was able to find a great slide, copyright access slide, purchased the license for, and on that photograph actually surrounding feedback were about 16 different icons. I thought it had been a really neat slide when I found it about a year ago, and it seemed so appropriate the other day for this team. So literally, the hook for this team was to get them to look at the photograph and then hear from all 16 in the room what was the icon or metaphor that represented what feedback meant for them. And I think it was very powerful. Certainly looking at the feedback after the call, very powerful. It was a much better way to get them into the room rather than me to start off at the top of the hour and start saying, okay, here's what feedback is. We really were able to leverage from them what feedback meant for them. And because it's a team, the sidebar impact was they started hearing from each other what was important about this topic of feedback, what did they find as tricky, and what was sort of unique about it. So think about area number one, which is really, again, moving the needle on engagement. We have that limited time window. Some writing says, you have 0.07 seconds. That's the writing of Judith Glaser in her book, Conversational Intelligence. Other authors say you have half a minute or so. Regardless, we want to get them into the room very, very quickly. And whether it is, those icons that you show or a visual, maybe it's a map. Certainly when I'm doing training corporate-wise, and we have people from all over the globe, getting them to identify where they're at really can be a great thing. Again, it's not the be-all and end-all, but it's another way to bring people into the room. Now, of course, in the virtual domain, another key area we want to be tuned to is how are we helping people orient to where they are now and where we're going to go. And that's where another key element in any process is to really outline what are the key points you want to cover. Today, as I said at the start, we're going to look at 4 areas, and I hope that as you're going, you're taking some notes so that you can really think about what are these elements that you would like to incorporate in your own work. Now, whatever the roadmap is, and perhaps you have a roadmap icon, again, to create that visual interest, how will you be reviewing and reinforcing these throughout the call? There is so much that we can be doing in our work, and so much of the time we want to be thinking intentionally on what are those visual elements. I would say this is one of the big differences. In the classroom, face-to-face, we can wing it. In the virtual classroom, a little harder to wing it. It is, of course, a skill we can develop, but I think oftentimes, at least what I assert in the book, is that there's more need for planning and preparation. So before we move off of this area number 1, 4 ways to boost or move the needle on engagement, I'd like you to just quickly note anything else that's important for you on the start. Take 20 seconds to just note that, and then we're going to be moving on to area number 2. So, area for number 2 is activities for engagement. And this, in fact, is going to be a focus of some of the upcoming calls. So today is really that meta-level view. Go into much more detail in a whole chapter on the book that's chapter 7, on different activities. Key principles, regardless of what we're going to bring in, is that we want to have a variety of approaches. Earlier this morning, I was working with a group of coaches, and we were talking about how important it is, especially in the virtual realm, to be meeting all those different learning styles. We want to have the visual learning, which of course on a video-based or a streaming system like this is so important. We also want to have auditory approaches. So chances are you may be meeting with your virtual groups for multiple touch points. What are those auditory ways that you can engage with podcasts, with short audio recordings, with dialogue-based approaches through breakouts or in between sessions of peer partners? These are all really critical in getting people into different sets of dialogue and different sets of learning. Now, the one area that is completely overlooked in a lot of virtual programming today is, of course, the kinesthetic approaches. As a former I shouldn't say former experiential educator, as an experiential educator at heart, very much it's all about getting people's bodies and minds into action on the calls. So I'd like you, and we'll have a future call about this for a whole half an hour, I'd like you to think about the activities you tend to go to in your work. Maybe one of your defaults is, I'm going to send people out into breakout. Or maybe another approach is, I'm just going to keep on talking. Is there a way that you can get people to connect through the different channels, visual, auditory, kinesthetic, in a way that mixes things up? Maybe between sessions, or if you're doing a longer program during a break, you might give people instructions like, I want you over the course of the next few minutes to go and find a pad of paper, bring it back with you along with a pen, or find some post-it notes, whatever the instructions are. We do want to always have different approaches to really keep things fresh, keep things moving. And that's one of the reasons why these calls are actually only 30 minutes. For longer learning environments, I think 1 hour, hour plus calls are great if we can afford it. But I know for many of you, you're listening in, you're viewing in, you have limited time. So the notion here is to take these shorter areas, really zoom in, light touch point, 30 minutes, you're in and you're out. So key principle number 1 with any activity choice, adjust approaches. Number 2, change pace regularly. For many years, we've been using the litmus test of every 7 to 10 minutes to be mixing things up, to be changing pace. In the virtual domain, we want to move that needle even more quickly. Now, this is where your group members are really going to be your best test or feedback mechanism in terms of how much faster is that. We hear from some e-learning designers that you want to do it every 30 to 60 seconds. For a lot of my learners, that's a little too long. They want to stop, hear a story, and then keep moving. So change pace regularly. For you, what does that mean? Is that 30 seconds? Is that 7 minutes? The notion is we want to have a variety of approaches in our back pocket to get people moving regularly. For more info on activities, because this is an area of my specialty, my sweet spot, do stay tuned for our upcoming activities call later this year. One final note on activities, because I think virtually we are always thinking through how much time is this going to take. I keep returning back to a really important point that I was first trained around as an experiential educator called the 2-to-1 ratio. And in the 2-to-1 ratio, we want to leave as much time or double the amount of time for dialogue after the experience. Again, so I'll say that again, 2-to-1 ratio, you want to leave as much time or double the time after the process for dialogue to reflect on the experience. And very much think about powerful learning experiences you've facilitated or attended. Chances are you moved through an experience, whether it was putting puzzles together with team members or whether it was designing a process. And after that, we want to leave a pause point for reflection, for dialogue, for connection with others in our group, or even just individual writing. If you're trying to fit too much into a process, we may lose sort of the resulting end of the learning loop. And in effective virtual conversations, like most of my books, I just remind us that, you know what, in learning, we often are going back to Kolb's model of erga. So we have an experience. We then move into R, which is we need space for reflection. We also need space for generalization, which is asking the question, like, so what? So I had this experience, so what does that connect with, or how does that connect with other things in my life? And finally, learning is not complete according to Kolb, and this is certainly what I see in my work, it is not complete until we have application opportunity. So as you think about activities for engagement, of course, we haven't zoomed into what can you do, but think about these key principles as you are starting to sift through your toolbox. And given that it's the summer months, and for many of us, slower times before things ramp up this fall, this might be a great time of the year to even find 15 minutes or 30 minutes to just take a look at what you have on hand already. A lot of skilled facilitators, coaches, trainers, and facilitators have a lot at their disposal already. Whether it's a bookcase or your files, I'd encourage you to just take a look through what you have. Chances are you might have a little bit more that you could be bringing in to further change that pace, further just keep things fresh for yourself as well as your learners. Okay, so 20-second break here, just pause. What are the 1 or 2 items you want to undertake around looking at your activities? Is it adjusting approaches? Is it changing the pace? Is it taking a look at what you have? Before I move on to area 3 of moving the needle, just take a moment to note your next steps. And with that, area number 3, make it more than you. Now, today's call is not a great example. Last week was a little bit better. We had more than half a dozen people on the call, and so there was a little bit more interaction. But in the virtual space, we want to make sure that we're hearing more than just your voice. So how can you be cultivating the peer process? Is there an opportunity for breakouts to happen? Is there an opportunity for people to use chat? Is there an opportunity for people to raise hands, scribble on the screen, etc.? That is really it jazzes things up. And if we interface this with the 7 to 10 times or 7 to 10 minute rule, it keeps things flowing. So what I'm going to invite you to do, if you're on the call with me today, turn to chat, and I'd like you to just indicate what's one way that you would like to incorporate more peer process. As you think about the people you work with, what's 1 or 2 things you can be doing to adding more peer process into your work? One thing I see all the time in my work is a bit of a fear of going to breakout. And I really hope that this is something that a lot of facilitators, virtual facilitators, will work to overcome. Yes, technology can fail, but a lot of our technology platforms have become so much more user-friendly in terms of facilitating breakouts. As many of you know, the platform I prefer to use is Zoom. This is not really, a call for them, but as a facilitator, I find it's such a robust platform in allowing the opportunity for dialogue and the breakout. So it's as simple as clicking a mouse, and the only little tweak that happens is if people are calling in, as you bring people back to the room, as soon as you activate that room closing, they won't necessarily have 60 seconds. They may only have a few seconds and they're brought back to the main room. But this is one way that is really quite powerful in bringing the peer voice together, which for groups, people want to hear. And I think, again, looking at some others, it really is about having that peer process, that breakout, or even in between calls. Now, making it more than you may also want to bring in other related resources. Again, being sensitive to copyright and intellectual property. How can we direct people to others' articles or TED Talks that they've done, videos? Keeping it aligned with this notion of how do we access the visual, auditory, kinesthetic? Is there a way for you to bring in a TED Talk into your conversation or have as pre-work? And finally, another way to make it more than you is through special guests. And this is where I think in long-term virtual programming, it can be so beneficial to have a producer or have a co-facilitator. Last week, actually, one of my favorite co-facilitators virtually was here with us. We didn't get to hear from him, but we've had a lot of fun in about 3 years working with his organization. And one of the things that has, I think, worked very well is that throughout the course of a day together, we are on in different points. And that does allow for just a bit of a difference and a diversity. on a 15 to 30 minute call, it's not quite as important. However, in longer term programs, how is it that you're not just talking at people, but that you're really making it more than you? People don't want to hear just your stories. They want to hear other stories. So what we had seen come through chat, of course, was just also a recognition of use breakouts. And, again, this is something that I think as facilitators, we want to become more adept at doing. We want to have a backup in case a breakout fails. And usually the default is if a breakout fails, the person will stay with you. So are you ready to have the dialogue with them? Another key piece on breakouts is, of course, to provide instructions. So I'll say a little bit more on this after area 4, but just before we go there, please take 20 seconds to note for yourself, if you have an upcoming program in mind, what are you going to do to make it more than you? Are you going to incorporate a TED Talk or find a new article or have a special guest drop in just to change the pace a little bit? Take 15 seconds right now to identify for yourself, how will you make it more than you? And area number 4 is peer interaction. So going a little bit deeper through this, again, it might be in the breakouts, it might be in peer interaction between calls, certainly for longer processes. I had a very powerful learning earlier this year. Even though I've been doing, a lot of virtual work, when I say a lot, probably tens of thousands of hours a year on with different groups, often with global groups that are virtual. They never meet each other before the program. They're not connecting afterwards. So it's not an organizational context. It's a dispersed geographic area. And I had a very powerful learning around peer interaction. It was a group that was meeting for the span of let's call it about 4 months. And we were meeting for 3-hour blocks each and every week. One week I had to be away, and I thought this would be a great opportunity for some of the group members to meet up with each other. So we actually co-designed a peer assignment. They would meet in that middle week that I was not going to be there for a quick 30-minute conversation, and we talked about, okay, what are the things you might want to talk about? How can it help for the learning? We've been together as a group for about a month at this stage, and I really left the call thinking, okay, we've got, and people had chimed in with their ideas, really, ready to go. People had email addresses. They were off to the races. So I came back 2 weeks later and I said, hey, how did it go? 1 out of 4 groups had met. And I was a little surprised, given, to be honest, I was quite surprised because everyone had seemed really, really keen on doing it. And so I said, okay, do you have each other's email addresses? And it was sort of like, yeah, sort of have it now. But what was very interesting was that on this call, we finally transitioned out of a phone-based environment to Zoom. And what I noticed, even like as we were having this conversation of people having not met, was that they were a little bit more comfortable than I'd heard in their voices. To me, it was a big sort of aha of like the importance of bringing streaming in, audios and visuals in as soon as possible to really create that trust and connection. And another call will be looking at the triad, the trust, connection, and safety that I talk about significantly throughout the book. But I think we really want to be thinking about how are we cultivating that trust between peers from the onset. If you are on a phone-only environment, it may take longer. Even if you are working to set people up for success, they may not feel comfortable reaching out to that person half a world away. So what was interesting is after going back to this group, let's call it week 6, we were together. 1 out of the few groups had met. The next week I was going to be away again. And I said, okay, so today we've been on Zoom. You've really all met each other finally, even though we've been together for 6 weeks. Let's design what you're going to do next week. And really designed, they talked about it. I said, I'll see you in 2 weeks. Let's see what happens. And wouldn't you know, 2 weeks later when I came back, 100% of everyone had met. And whether or not it was just the one respective people finally seeing each other, I think really that was something that got people over this hurdle. So in Cultivating more peer interaction, there are a couple of things we want to do to really also set people up for success. Depending on the types of groups that we're working with, there may need to be some skill development. And I think some of the core skills become listening, questioning, and how do you help people really zoom into what they want to talk about. And that to me is a skill we call bottom lining in conversation. Depending on the types of people that you are working with, they may already have well-developed skills in listening and in questioning. Just be very careful, or not careful, but be very intentional in thinking about how could you help those peer conversations become even better. And I think an inherent point is this second note, which is, what are the agreements you want to create as a group? Is this an opportunity for people to coach each other, listen to each other, or is it an advisory session? My guess is for most of you, it's not appropriate for peers to provide advice unless that's being asked for. So there may be an agreement up front that each pairing, whether it's 2 or 3 people, are talking about what it is that they want. Do they want advice? Do they want coaching? Do they want consulting? Do they want mentoring? Help people think through and talk through what agreements they want to create. Another thing that's going to facilitate this, as I've talked about, my example really touched on the platforms. How do we help people have those conversations? Are they already set up on Skype and can Skype each other? Do they feel comfortable sharing each other's email addresses? Can we set up a platform internally, i.e. another room, which they can access at any time? So think about, how do you help those peers connect in a safe way, connect in a private way. And obviously, groups that know each other better are probably going to have, opened up what safety means for them. And when I say opened up, it might be easier to reach out to someone to say, hey, here's my phone number, and feel that that's like an appropriate way or a safe way to do it. With peer interaction, another 2 considerations is really, what are the questions you want to provide? I typically, whenever I ask people to meet in between calls, I'll provide them with 1 or 2 prompting questions related to the themes that we want. And I will talk about it, I'll offer it auditorily, and then I'll include it in my follow-up email. We'll also, as a group, have come to some agreement. How long are you going to meet for? That way no one's feeling awkward or sort of out of sorts if they're only meeting for 15 minutes and feeling like maybe we needed to meet for an hour, when in fact it was only 15 minutes. A final question I wanted to just touch on in today's call is the notion of breakout size. And recently I've had a lot of emails actually coming, what's the ideal size of a breakout? You really want to think this through. If breakout size is too large, people will tend to get lost in the anonymity. Social loafing is a term that we use. And so that typically will happen in breakouts, virtual breakouts, where people can't see each other, of groups, 4, 5, 6, or I would say 5 plus. My ideal sweet spot, I would say, is somewhere between 3 and 4 people in a virtual breakout. 2 is great if you know that the technology is going to work and you have time and space for that deeper dialogue. 3 or 4 is also a good size, but make sure that you're setting people up for success in terms of maybe 1, assigning roles when people don't know each other. Perhaps there's a facilitator, a note taker, a timekeeper. What are the instructions about returning back to the room? Are people expected to report back on what they've just said or other? So with peer interaction, a lot of learning here. I think it's an under-tapped area, especially in a virtual domain. It doesn't have to just be all about the facilitator. So take 15 seconds maybe and just note for yourself, what is it around peer interaction that you would like to keep an eye on? And then I'll talk about our next call. So we are back together next week, same time, same bat line, as I like to say. For the book, anyone who's interested in going a little bit deeper into the topics that we've touched on today, there's a number of different resources. Moving the Needle on Engagement, on pages 225 and 226, I cover 6 areas to consider in any virtual presentation. I've only touched on 4 of the 6 today. If you've purchased the book, there is a downloadable worksheet/template at effectivevirtualconversations.com. If you have purchased the book and if you've not yet found where to download, the instructions are towards the start of the book on page X, or Roman numeral 10. And you will find the code that you can enter to access that purchasers only website. Felt that it was really important in this new book to provide you with some worksheets and templates that you can use in your own work. The corollary here, of course, is please do not duplicate those and use them under your own banner. They can be used with the current branding and shared with your teams and groups. Another couple of places that you'll want to look if you have the book. Chapter 4 talks about different design principles, and many of these approaches that we've touched on today, particularly peer processes, are further extended. And also exercises, chapter 7. So stay tuned for more of these 30-minute calls. Again, as you can see how quickly time has gone. I want to thank you for joining me. And just a reminder to really keep tracking your steps. The book has a downloadable action plan tracker, and actually the last part of the book has this in print. Please note for yourself how you want to track your steps. And I hope that you'll keep connected and join me not only for another call, we're back here next week, maybe one of our upcoming programs for fall 2017. Those will be starting up mid-September. And also for coaches, mentor coaching groups starting actually in a couple of hours, in an hour, and also in September as well. Want to thank you for joining me. And until next week, our focus will be next week on virtual platforms. So I'm going to go through some of the more common platforms and also looking at different ways that we can be boosting engagement and having more effective virtual conversations. Have a great week, everyone. I'll see you next week. Take care.